Okay guys, welcome back. Once again, it's me at Solid Shell Security. Yes, that is right, my nickname is me. I don't know about you, but I am a me. Okay, so you've gone through the beginning, the intro stuff, we've talked about Easy Apache. Alright, let's talk about setting up other services. Okay, when working with other services, it's all going to be underneath the service configuration button, tab, thingy, whatever you want to call it. Okay. Alright, so let's talk about the Apache configuration. The Apache configuration setting is all the default Apache configurations. We can check out the global configuration. So if we want to change, honestly, you probably want to set all this stuff on, off, like, the PCI recommendations. Personally, it really doesn't quite matter. I mean, the only thing it's really doing is hiding the version numbers and stuff like that, which just makes running exploits and stuff like that from script kits a lot more difficult. So just shut these things off. It's just whatever, so like none. Okay, whatever. This also gives you the default directory options, so you can shut these things off. I will say this, depending on how you do this, it can cause issues with a lot of scripts. So if you start going through like shutting things off, stuff breaks, there's a reason why. Some of the major CMS scripts, they're kind of touchy when it comes to working with some of these. I forget the exact ones, but if you look it up, because there's a symlink attack, and we were all debating the best way to deal with it with the Apache patch, which actually was the best option to deal with it. But some people were talking about disabling the follow symlinks, and how that actually ended up breaking some popular CMS scripts because they have to use them, so you have to actually end up going through the htaccess files and renaming them so it actually use the symlinks of owner match. So that was just a whole big thing, so we're just going to leave that there, but you have that control, that option as the defaults, so you actually have the control for all the Apache defaults there. So that way when you do in fact compile, whatever, it's going to stay the same compared if you would actually go into the file and actually do it. So if that's just, you want to make sure that you do it through WHM, or if you do it through the rebuild scripts, so you know exactly how to handle it. It's just better that way. We've already done this one. You can change the directory indexes. So if we wanted to make, for whatever reason, we want to make the WML, the first priority one, that it has dominance over the rest. So you can just save that, but we're not going to bother with that, just showing that you can change that. We have the include editor, so these here are the main ones you want to talk about. The pre-main include, let's say we use this version, and this is where you start making your changes, such as if you wanted to have something remain and stay when Apache got reconfigured and compiled, you would use these to insert your stuff. So I'm just pointing that out, that if you want to do something to keep it, you'd want to go through that editor. We can change which IPs we want to keep safe. Memory usage restrictions. Personally, I've not really used this. I mean, I've always, like done this, to enable it and to protect it and stuff. But honestly, really, I've never had any problems or ever really need to use this at all. I mean, if you want to use it, enable it, whatever. But personally, I've found better ways than to actually use that. Okay, no back button. So I'm gonna go back here, blah blah, go to Apache. So we have that option, we have the log rotation. So you got the basic options here. Oops. Sorry about that, it was kind of weird. Okay. So again, used to this little keys, it's got like the shift key right up next to the up button. That was interesting. Okay, back to the service configurations. Alright, so let's talk about the XM Configuration Manager. This is a big one. Now, at some point, you're going to be dealing with a lot of email complaints or spam or something along the lines of that. I mean, it's just, you're going to deal with spam or something email related. It's going to happen if you start hosting people. So I'm not even going to bother going through to explain all this because this is just too much for one video. This itself is honestly like its own video series, but I'm just going to show off that, for example, for the XM configuring, you've got like a lot of options. You've got a lot of power, you've got You know, your spam assassin. Spam assassin itself is going to be a friend. Actually, it's not going to be just a friend. You're going to get married to spam assassin, and you're going to have, you know, little kids that run off with hammers and beat the crap out of spam. I mean, you're going to love spam assassin. Once you get the idea, you understand how spam assassin works. It's very powerful. It's got a lot of control. You're going to enjoy it. So that's a whole other video series, but I just want to show you the options that are here if you want to look into them. But you're going to spend some time in here to set up filters and configuration settings to block out spam. FTP. I'm going to go through this real quick. We don't need anonymous. We don't need anonymous uploads. These are just problems waiting to happen. Shut those things off. No, we're not going to log into FTP at the root. We're going to use shell. Typically for maximum connections, I typically set that to 500. 18 FileZilla typically has about 10 connections per IP. That's pretty much more than enough, but just to avoid the issues with clients complaining, why doesn't FTP work? Why can't I get in? You know, we're just going to do stuff like that. You can enable broken clients compatibility. It just really depends on what you're going to be balancing through all this setup and configuration. It's going to be basically convenience, ease of use compared to security. So if you really want to be more secure, you're going to have to expect to spend more time with your clients explaining you can't do it that way, you have to do it this way. So it's going to be a trade-off and a balance. You just have to pick which way you want to go. So that's really what you got to think about when you're doing all this stuff. So we did that, and like always, you can always switch your FTP services. Each one's going to offer their own advanced pros and cons. So you're going to want to pick which one. You can even go through the effort if you want to go manually, install your own. But honestly, just stick with this. I personally just prefer using the pure FTPD, but if you want to like use pure-ftp, it's a lot more flexible. It has, from what I remember right, the ability to work better with plugins. So if you're going to do a lot of stuff like virus scanning through FTP, you might need to go pure-ftp. I don't know that exactly. Things may have changed over the years. So I'm just going to point that out. We have mail server configuration. You know, you might need to change this at times, depending on if you get attacks or, you know, whatever. So we're not going to go through all the little options and explain every little detail, but once again, you can choose your mail server. You can manage the SSL certificates, name server selections, PHP Configuration Editor. Personally, I don't even bother touching or messing with this. Here's the advanced mode. I've always been one to just go through the actual file because as far as I know, PHP, when recompiled, will not override the PHP ini file. So you can actually go in there and actually edit all this stuff exactly. But either way works, as far as I know. You can do it through here. You can actually go into command line interface and do it, which I prefer to do. But either way, this is how you would edit your PHP ini. I'm not going to go through and explain all the settings and what to do. There's really not too much you really need to change. You may want to change the amount of memory allowed to use. I typically set that to about 512 because we've got clients who use like big e-commerce scripts that need about 512 in memory. So we typically set that high. We've also raised the limits a lot more on timeouts and the amount of and the file size that can be uploaded. But once again, it really comes down to what you want to set your server up to do. So I'm just going to leave that at that. The service manager, this is a nice one. This is basically what's going to monitor your services. Enabled, boot up, turn on. And then monitoring, if it like at any point goes down, it will restart the service and bring it back up. You know, so typically, okay, let's just monitor, you know, the main ones here. Just make sure they stay up. You know, but you can also come in through here and disable some stuff. Like if we don't want to basically run the XM stats, we don't want to check the bandwidth, we don't want to see, you know, the brute force attacks and stuff, you know, we can choose that and mess around and all that, but typically the defaults are typically fine, so we're just going to leave that at that. And that pretty much covers all the services and configuring them. From what I've noticed, you honestly never ever will use this. The only time you probably would ever use this is the initial configuration of the server. That's about it. Other than that, you really would never ever expect to find yourself in this at all. You're going to do everything through the command line interface, you know, editing files, creating files, managing configurations and stuff like that, especially when it comes to working with Spam Assassin and Exim. You're probably going to be a lot in the files, a lot from the command line interface, even going in to create custom Spam Assassin files, as you're going to see. Even with a lot of other service configurations, you're typically always going to be in the command line interface. You're still very, very limited as to what you can do through the web interface. And you can still do a lot of the stuff through the command line interface that's not going to cause the system to override your settings. So right here you've got the languages here, Security Center. Honestly, a lot of the stuff is personally I consider just a joke. The PHP open base directory, that really doesn't do a thing as the way we have PHP running, so that's kind of stupid. The bomb protection, you can enable that, but it's really not that big of an issue. The compiler access, you can block compilers, but still, you can still get past that. I mean, a lot of this stuff here, when it comes to basically security settings, really don't do much at all. You can disable them, enable them, do whatever you want with them, but personally, they're not going to be what we're going to be focusing on for security. The simple little things, I mean, they're good to enable and use, but they really are not going to basically help much at all. And the one thing I will say that is going to be very helpful is going to be the host control. This is going to be locking down certain daemons to just your IP and subnetworks and stuff like that, such as SSH. That is going to be one of the main security things. Personally, I use command line interface to go in here and do this, but you can actually go through here and just go ahead and enable it. Another little thing what we do is we actually got a little modification tweak and patch for CPanel WHM, which allows you to lock down certain usernames such as root to just specific IPs. So you know someone can't come in here and then edit the access list and then log into the shell. So if you want to lock root down to your IP, you could actually give the IP address, not IP, but you can give out the password for the root account, and they still couldn't even access the server because they can't log into WHM because it's locked down to your IP. So more stuff on that later, but so there's a lot of little tweaks like that that we're going to focus on when it comes to security, because the stuff in WHM really isn't security at all. It's nice to put in there, but they really doesn't do too much at all. In fact, I've never seen an attack ever, such as I've never seen a shell bomb go off at all. You're going to have more issues with like sites spamming and stuff like that than something like that, or someone trying to run a service in the background, like a binary or something. You're just not going to have things like that happen. So really, Security Center really doesn't do much. Then here we go, IP functions real quick. This is what I was talking about when you add new IP addresses. We don't have any to add because it's not seeing any in the system, but you can add them if you need to. Actually, I think I got that whole thing completely wrong. It should have actually shown the ability to add IPs. I don't know why it wasn't doing that. Sorry about that, but that's how you would add the IPs. You can change your site's IP address. If we got domains, then we just click change. This is how you're going to do all your IP stuff. It's best to make sure you do it through the system and not try and do it in the files themselves. Packages. What else do we want to talk about? Now here's a little plugin right here. As you can see, we got the mod security plugin. Here we go. Let's talk about this. Edit config and default configuration. The default configuration is not bad. It's better than nothing. You can load your own rule sets in, but we'll just go ahead and load the default in. So return logs. If anything happens, you're just going to show the attacks, the blocks and stuff. So that's how you do that. But that's where the plugins are going to be kept, and that's mod security. So we're going to go ahead and turn that on. We'll talk more about that in a later episode about actually installing and configuring mod security rules. But really that really covers everything about configuring through WHM. Actually, there's one last little thing. But most of this other stuff, really, there is not too much. But I'm going to hit this real quick. This is actually a nice little thing if you want to access the phpMyAdmin with the root account. If you want to manage MySQL through this, this is nice. If you want a quick way to find an abusive query, this is the best way to do it because it's going to show the time, how long, and the user. This is assuming that you've got PHP running and other stuff running as that user, but this is the best way to find that. You can also kill it if you need to. But I want to go through server configuration real quick, and let's do statistics real quick. Primarily, if you want to enable all these things by default and make it available to users, you can. It once again depends on your business model. Some clients might complain, why isn't it enabled? Why isn't it running? And so if you don't have to go and enable it for them, or something, you can leave it as default. Personally, I find it more of a resource abuse usage. If they don't need it, just disable it by default, and then let them enable it by they want to. Typically, AW stats is the primarily one that they want. This one's pretty much caused a lot of issues with servers right now when it comes to running. It runs high, so it causes some slowness when ran. I personally don't use that one. I don't even think I have it enabled at all for any users, but typically AW stats is what's going to be used most. But once again, it's how you set this up is basically based on your business model and how you want to give it to your clients, make it easy to use. It really comes down to that. But you have the ability to process them, disable them for other users. So once again, it comes down to your business model and how you want to do it. I've not had too many issues with stats, like slowing the server down or anything like that. But then again, we don't have them enabled by default for all the sites. So it's like one client here or there, so it's nothing like that. Update preferences. Which one do you want to typically run? We personally prefer to run current. We don't run Edge. We've not really had any issues with Edge. Sometimes we've actually used it, but preferably we like to remain current. It really doesn't quite matter too much which ones you do. If you want to run stable and always make, they're going to push the security patches to all of them pretty much once they know that they work and you're stable, but you're going to probably get them faster on current, along with some other tweaks and other features and stuff, as you can tell. Current's going to have the most up-to-date stuff. You can run Edge if you really want to push bleeding edge, but I really don't see any reason to. Probably your best bet will probably be to run on release or current. They tend to be pretty close. You can look in the documentation, that's the difference, but personally I prefer current. I want to make sure I'm running, everything as possible. I just like staying up to date. Automatic, everything. So click save. Now if you want to update now, let's just say we went from stable to current, we want to get the 1.5 over the 0.11. We can hit update now and we get updated, but you probably won't want to do that if the server is under heavy load, so we're just going to skip that. But that's how you manage your updates. This is the big one. I'm not even going to bother trying to explain all this stuff. Oh dear. I'm going to lose my voice before I even finish, but this right here would probably end up taking about 30 minutes alone just to go through every little option. We probably will actually make a video explaining some of this stuff, but actually, we probably actually will just to explain how to use all this stuff, but that's going to be another video series. But this right here is pretty much the entire config on CPanel, exactly, and how everything runs, is maintained, monitored. This is just basically every little thing, and we can go through and just select the domain configurations and the logging, the mail, the notifications, stuff like that. But this is really business model, what you want to allow to your users and stuff like that. But this will basically be another video just because there's just so much to talk about. I just want to show you guys that the tweak settings are there. So if you want to, make tweaks, edit them, you can do that. There is some things you want to enable, some things you definitely want to disable. but that is going to be for another video, so make sure you subscribe and keep on top of us, and we will tell you when that video comes out. But yeah, so that's pretty much how you're going to configure WHM. If you want to edit themes, you can do that. If you want to manage your languages, install, update software, do a restart, your certificates, you can check your system health. But honestly, when it comes down to it, once you've gone through the initial configuration stage through WHM, you will not be using WHM to maintain and monitor your server. You really just won't. I mean, I've honestly have never used it once I've configured everything. The only time I ever come in to WHM is if I have to like modify an account, change an IP on an account, or do something account related. And that's going to be in your account functions here. If I'm going to do something through it, I would do it through here, like a password modification or whatever. Typically, that is the only time that I'm going to typically come into WHM, is if it's account related. Actually, now two other things I want to talk about in configuring backups. This is nice. If you're going to restore backups to a machine, upload them to like root home, and then you can click on restore backups. Since we don't have it enabled, actually not that, maybe this was it. Well, okay, I don't know why it's misbehaving. Probably we don't have backup enabled configured, but what you do is you just type in the username, and it'll start rebacking up everything and restore the account. But let me just talk backups real quick. You know, if we want to keep daily backups, you know, days to run, get them all. You can mount to a drive, we can go remote, we can go local. So you have a lot of different options on how to configure the backup. But if you want to use the CPanel backup, there's a lot of other backup systems out there, which we will talk about in other videos and go through them, such as the pros and cons of each. But for the time being, I just want you to know that CPanel does have a backup system. This is what I was talking about, sorry about that. This is where you would type in the username, restore, and you can upload them to any of these locations and we'll see them, and then we'll pull them in, and then it'll start going through the process of restoring the backup file. So it saves a lot of time when it comes to transferring. You can also transfer from server to server. So I'm just pointing that stuff out there. One last thing I want to hit on configurations is really the packages. You can edit a package. Actually, some other stuff now I think about it. But you know, you set your package name, set your specifics. You can also use a remote management system like WHMCS or something as a built-in application to manage all this stuff. But I just want to show you can actually do it manually and create your packages and managing them. And this is your feature list. If you want to create different features for different packages and what the client on the CPanel interface can actually access and use, such as if we don't want them to be able to install stuff or manage something or do anything, we can control that with this. So you know, we have more control on what they can and cannot do. Just want to show that real quick. Resellers real quick. Actually, we don't really have one. I forgot about that. But what you're going to want to do is, once you have create an account, give that account a reseller privileges. You're going to want to go through and configure what they can and cannot access. It's going to be like, there's many different ways you can configure the the reseller privileges, and you can actually use this to create secondary admins, lower level admins, and can give access, so that you know that you can give someone lesser access to manage accounts instead of giving them the root access. So there's a lot of security stuff to be gained in a multi-user setup with that. So you can do that to set up administrator accounts, give them certain access as well. And then you can also, instead of running WHM as root for all your accounts, you can set up like a hoster or some other account name and give it the minimum privileges needed to set up all the accounts. So you have the two different options there. The only difference is you may not have the ease of access of logging in and being able to manage stuff to that account, so you have to log in as root or something. But once again, it comes down to business model, how you want to do your security settings and stuff like that. And sorry about that screensaver. But so you really have that level of access there. We're going to go through once again another whole video on just that setup. But this video I just wanted to pretty much go over a lot of the basics and explain just how you can configure and set stuff up. But we're going to go more in depth on a lot of the stuff later. I just wanted to show all that. So that pretty much concludes this video, and we will see you in the next one.